Today we are going to read Chapter 2 of the English reader Little Lord Fauntleroy. But before we begin, I would like to give you a recap of the previous lesson. In the first chapter, we learned that Cedric and his mother were left alone after Captain Errol's death. We also read how Captain Errol met and married Cedric's mother, which made his father, the Earl, very angry, and the Earl told him that he was never to return home. The Earl had sent away Captain Errol to America because it upset him to see that Captain Errol had all the qualities of being a good Earl, but he would never be an Earl. So when Captain Errol realized that he could never go back to England, he was heartbroken. But he managed to find a job and to make a simple and humble life with his wife and child in New York. We also read that Cedric's mother had brought him up well. Cedric learned how to read at a very young age and was especially interested in politics. His best friend was grumpy Mr. Hobbs, the grocery store owner, who hated the British and the British royalty. And towards the end of the chapter, we read that a gentleman came from England to see Cedric and his mother, and he called Cedric Little Lord Fauntleroy. Now let's turn to chapter 2, page 16. Cedric's friends. Cedric was stunned at the news. Stunned meaning he was shocked. His grandfather, whom he had never seen, was an earl. Both of his uncles would have been earls too, but they died. And now, since only Cedric was left, he was to be an earl one day. Now he was to be called by the family name, Lord Fauntleroy, and he would have to live in England. "Dearest," he said, "I'd rather not go all the way to England. Must I go?" "I'm sorry, Ceddie," Dearest said, "but yes, you must. I know your papa would wish you to go. He loved his home. I would be selfish if I didn't send you." Cedric didn't understand. Obviously, Cedric was too young to understand this complicated change in his life and that why he had to leave his home and his friends. He would miss his home and his friends. When Mr. Havisham, his grandfather's lawyer, had come to Cedric's house, the little boy had heard many exciting things. But it didn't make him feel any better to know that he would be a rich man when he grew up. Now you see, Cedric was brought up in a very simple, honest way by his parents, and he did not give too much importance to money. So he did not feel excited to know that one day he would be a very rich, important man and he would own castles. It did not make him any happier than he already was. He would have castles here and castles there. He would have tenants who lived on his lands, whatever that meant. So Cedric didn't know the meaning of the word tenants. Tenants were people who would live on his lands and pay rent for it. For example, if you are living in a rented house and you're paying the rent, then you are a tenant. And the person who actually owns the house is the landlord. So Cedric would be the landlord and people living on his lands would be tenants. So let's read on from here. But right now, he still had to leave his home and his friends. So at the moment, this was his only worry. Cedric was especially troubled about leaving Mr. Hobbs. He went as soon as he could to tell him the news. Cedric knew that Mr. Hobbs didn't like earls. They had just been talking about it. So Cedric was very nervous when he said, "I am one, or I'm going to be. I cannot lie to you." What Cedric is saying, that he cannot hide the fact that he would one day be an earl from his best friend, Mr. Hobbs. Mr. Hobbs was confused. "Something's the matter with your head," he said. "Are you feeling ill? Are you dizzy? Is it a very hot day?" Now you see, Mr. Hobbs didn't believe what Cedric was saying. So he thought maybe Cedric was ill because he was saying such odd things. "No, I'm not ill," said Cedric. "I'm sorry to say it's true. I am going to be an earl. Mr. Havisham was telling Dearest, and he's a lawyer. My grandfather sent him all the way from England to tell us." Mr. Hobbs stared wildly at Cedric. "Who is your grandfather?" he asked. Cedric took out a piece of paper from his pocket. "I couldn't remember it, so I wrote it down," he said. And he read slowly. "John Arthur Molyneux Errol, Earl of Dorincourt. He lives in a castle, in 2 or 3 castles, I think. Now I have to go live with him." Cedric did not seem happy about his news. "England is very far away, isn't it?" he asked. "Across the Atlantic Ocean," said Mr. Hobbs. "That's the worst of it," said Cedric. "I shall not see you again for a long time. I don't like to think of that, Mr. Hobbs." "Even the best of friends must part," said Mr. Hobbs. You see, Mr. Hobbs tried to explain to Cedric that sometimes even the best of friends have to go away, they have to part because of the circumstances in life. The two were quiet for some moments. Then they began to talk of what Cedric would do once he became an earl. Cedric said he would be a good one. He would not be a tyrant. A tyrant is a cruel, oppressive person. So, you see, Mr. Hobbs had always told Cedric that lords and earls were cruel people. They were tyrants. So now Cedric was saying that if he were an earl, he would definitely not be a tyrant. He would try to be a good one. If there was another war with America, he would try to stop it, he told Mr. Hobbs. You see, England and America had fought 2 wars. So Cedric was saying that if there was a chance of a third one, of another war, he would try to stop it. He said a great many things that would have surprised Mr. Havisham. Mr. Havisham didn't know very many young boys, especially boys as smart and good-hearted as Cedric. Now you see, Cedric was having this conversation with Mr. Hobbs, and Mr. Havisham was not present there. But had he been there and had he heard Cedric talk like a grown-up responsible person, although he was very, very young, he would have been definitely very surprised. All right, so we'll stop here and we will continue reading from here next week. But before we stop, I would like you to answer a few questions for me. You can send the answers to these questions to me by making a video or an audio. Question number 1 is, why did Cedric write his grandfather's name on a piece of paper? Question number 2. What was the Earl's full name? We will meet again next week. Till then, goodbye.